welcome to The Spoken Nerd, the podcast for database professionals. I'm your host, Connor McDonald, and in this episode, we keep chatting to a long-time Oracle employee, Dom Giles, about all things related to Oracle. We'll have a chat about the recently finished CloudWorld conference held in Las Vegas as opposed to San Francisco, and also the role of DBAs, whether that role is going to change as cloud takes over the world. And we'll touch on everyone's favorite technology du jour at the moment, microservices. Please enjoy this session with Dom Giles. You mentioned there's a lot of DBAs out there and they're looking after large numbers of databases. I'm going to segue onto CloudWorld because one of the things I noticed at CloudWorld I thought was very interesting was when you looked at the various sessions throughout the whole conference, both at Caesars Forum and at the Venetian where the venue was. One of the things I found very interesting was the sessions that were very DBA focused had huge numbers. And I wanted to get your thoughts on this because, in almost whether they're upgrade ones, patching ones, AWR, performance tuning, etc., all of these ones had pretty much people out the door, couldn't get into these sessions. And I found it very interesting because there's been that sort of talk that the DBA role is diminishing, there's very less DBAs in the world, they're not going to be needed anymore, you're not going to see them at conferences, etc. Yet the DBA role seems to be alive and well. I won't jump on my high horse and say this is something I've claimed all along because I always thought the DBA role was going to get busier, not less busy when it came to cloud and stuff. But did that surprise you at all? Or
I'll be honest, I wasn't surprised at all. I think DBAs, there's always going to be the same number of DBAs. They're just going to be asked to do more. It's always been my view of the world. And so the fact that they're actually attending sessions to try and figure out how they can make their life simpler is no surprise to me at all. It would be incredibly popular. And it's true for any database, whether you're looking at cloud databases, whether you're looking at on-premise databases, whether you're looking at monolithic or microservice-driven databases, someone always has to be responsible for that stack. There is always the patching requirement. There's always the backup requirement. There's always someone who understands how a database, whatever type of database it is, works. And so more databases. And I think, if your career is in database administration, you're starting off, all power to you, because I think you'll have a long and a successful career. You can't avoid it. And I'd love to think that Oracle could, solve all the autonomous problems in the world and make all the administrative requirements disappear. Still wouldn't change the number of DBAs that are required to actually look after. And I know I'm contradicting some of our promises when it comes to this technology stack, but it's just that they can do more. They can add more value to the overall process of administrating data. That they become more important, not less important inside of an organization.
I agree 100%. And so what happens is what they do might change, but they'll still be needed. And I'm glad you said that because especially when I go to various conferences in India and we have Q&A, one of the most common questions for people, because very, very strong DBA community there in India, is they'll say, what's happening to the DBA job? What's happening to the DBA role? And I often used to get kickback and I say, the more databases you move onto cloud, I said, the more DBAs you're going to need. And they'd say, what do you mean? That's not what you tell us. And I say, no, what's going to happen is at the moment, you might have to look after 10 databases. And the reason you look after 10 on premises is because it takes time to get another one. It takes storage. It takes money. I said, the moment you go to a cloud system where all of the 30 developers in your org can get their credit card out, click a button and get a database, rest assured they're going to come to you and go, I've screwed this up. I need to, get some source code control or whatever, some security. All that means is you're going to be busier than ever. So the concept of DBA role disappearing is just, it's a fiction. What happens is rather than looking after 10 databases, one DBA will look after 1,000.
The name DBA encompasses such a broad gamut of capabilities and skills. It is a catch-all for nearly every data-related problem. I think when I first started, it very much meant they were an administrator. They basically managed the table spaces. They did the backup. They made sure the users are added. But now it becomes almost a security expert. It becomes a performance expert. It becomes a data transformation expert. It becomes all of the skills that are critical to the lifeblood of any data administration rather than database administration type role.
So DBA numbers were big at CloudWorld, which was always pleased to see. Talking about CloudWorld, obviously I've never been to Vegas, and this was the first, I think, open world we've ever had in Vegas. There's been other Oracle events, Collaborate and other things at Vegas in the past, but I think this is probably the first Oracle open world, or CloudWorld as we now call it, at Vegas.
First one that's actually happened, yeah. I mean, they were scheduled for 2020, I believe, and
of course, yeah. So, now, last time we were together at a Oracle open world / CloudWorld event was in San Francisco. And you and I shared some oven fried Brussels sprouts. It's something that you got me onto. There was a distinct lack of Brussels sprouts in Vegas. But putting that aside, what are your thoughts on the switch to Vegas? Did you prefer it over San Francisco, or?
Do you know, it's tricky. San Francisco has so many positives and a lot of negatives. It was very, very expensive in the end to get a hotel room. Some customers are paying upwards of £700 a night for a hotel room. And I think once you reach that level, it becomes difficult to justify the costs for some customers. And so I think you need to break that circle. And so Las Vegas certainly made it, oddly enough, and I know it sounds strange, but certainly will make it more accessible to some organizations to actually attend. It certainly was a lot cheaper for me to attend there. I mean, I looked at the hotel bills, and the costs of dining out was significantly lower than it was in San Francisco. And that's not because of the Brussels sprout chips or anything like that. It was generally, so there were some positives from that perspective. Las Vegas is a interesting place.
I have to admit, I'd never been to Vegas before, and so it was certainly an eye-opener. And I have to admit, and for any locals to Las Vegas, I apologize. I kept toggling between the words fascinating and grotesque, and perhaps a blend of the two.
Yeah, in equal measures. I mean, I think it really depends on your, and I try my very best to keep away from that whole discussion. Always, I mean, I've been there over the years, for the last 30 years or so, I've had the opportunity, and I'll use the word opportunity, to actually attend Las Vegas, on about a 5-year rolling basis. And clearly now it's going to become more and more frequent. But I'd like to say it's changed, but I felt arriving there, it was exactly the same as when I left the last time there and the time before. And so it's just the things that change. It's an amazing place. In terms of the actual event itself, I was pleasantly surprised. It felt more intimate than it did at Moscone. People were certainly, the rooms, I think, were better laid out, just in terms of, it wasn't such a, getting to the hotel rooms was a long walk from your room. But once you're actually there, it felt you could actually go from session to session a much shorter period of time, unless you actually had to go over to the developer side. That was still kind of, everywhere in Las Vegas is a long walk. You can't avoid that. Everywhere is a long, far away from one another. But certainly, where I spent most of my time over in the Venetian, it was much more engaging. There was a real buzz, a real energy in the air as people were wandering through the various sessions. And I felt that. And, some of the conversations I had with customers, they felt exactly the same way. It was much... Yeah, it was nice to see people again, regardless, Connor. It was so nice to see the colleagues that I've worked with over the years and customers that I've engaged with over the years as well. It was just refreshing. And maybe the whole experience will wear on me over the years, when it comes back to flying back into Las Vegas and leaving Las Vegas. But whilst I was there, it felt really nice just to be able to speak to human beings again and engage again. So I was always going to have rose-tinted glasses on the whole experience, but it was great. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I loved it too. And same thing. I almost have a euphoria, and I actually, funny enough, I agree. I think Las Vegas helped that. And it's funny how before we go, everyone's going, "You go to Las Vegas,
gambling and drinking, yeah, shows, yeah." But no, none of that. We didn't do any of that, did we, Connor?
We did, but the funny thing is that mindset or that environment, I think, actually helped, because when you were walking around Vegas, even at night, you never felt unsafe, because it's a community place. There's a lot of people out, whatever. Now, I'm sure some Las Vegas local will reach out to me on Twitter and say, "Oh, you should have gone to this street and you would have been killed." But the reality is, felt happy, it felt safe. There's always that, everyone has a bit of a buzz about them. But certainly, yeah, I had a euphoria just in the sense that I say Las Vegas helped, because you could go to open world at Moscone, and you had to actively seek out people to bump into. You wanted to, but the reality is they could have been 3 kilometers away, but still in the same building. Whereas in Las Vegas, I had dozens of people, literally, you're just walking along and I'm zoned out, moaning to the world because I'm jet lagged, and someone, gives you a little punch in the chest and goes, "Hey, yeah, it's so and so," and and so that was great. The fact that
people punch you in the chest today, Connor. That's not the way they usually greet me. So,
well, normally it's in the face, so in the chest is normally a term of endearment. So now, obviously, the biggest thing at CloudWorld from our database perspective was talking about 23C, the upcoming release. I'll give you 90 seconds. What are the core things coming in 23C? There'll be plenty of chat about it in other forums, but in 90 seconds, to put it under the pump, what do you think of the core things coming in 23C that'll excite people?
There is so many things inside of 23C. 90 seconds isn't going to be able to cut it, but I think it's the focus on the developer that's at the heart of Oracle Database 23C. The code name App Simple was where we've actually spent an awful lot of time. And, we've talked over the last hour or so about the features and functionality of the Oracle database. And I think what you're starting to see now is Oracle refining some of this. We've got the opportunity to refine some of the features that we already have in the product and address trying to make things simpler for people who are looking to build applications or administer the resulting data sets that come from those applications. And so 23C is the focus of that. So in terms of big show-stopping features, you're going to hear lots over the coming months around our focus on graph databases, the ability to use a graph database as an operational data source inside of your systems and things like that, which customers haven't, at this point in time, haven't really had the opportunity to engage with. So what was historically niche technology, I think we're trying to simplify and bring to the front again. And that'll be good for the whole industry as a whole. So you'll see the focus on technology like graph. JSON, it clearly was a really important story for us moving forward, but some really interesting features around technology like JSON relational duality, the ability to actually, allow your developers to work in a format they feel incredibly comfortable with, and allow your analysts and your data engineers to work on, relational, and you don't care which one they're working on. They can update relational, they can update relational. We introduced a whole raft of new, locking technologies to the database. We introduced a whole raft of new improvements to SQL. Simple things. It was interesting. Las Vegas, when you actually discussing features that you had spent ages on and spent a lot of time putting feedback into, and then the customer turns around and say, my favorite feature is, the select without a from clause in the Oracle database. And you look at it and go, but. That's the difference with the release, right? All of us can have features that we think are important. And I certainly, with some of my favorite features like SQL Firewall, great feature. In the same way that schema privilege analysis, all those versions ago, was one of my favorite features. Related to security, it's odd, I'm not a big security expert, but oddly enough, it's those sort of things that I think will have a dramatic impact on end users. And so SQL Firewall is a fantastic feature as well. So there were so many things that we can't wait to tell people about and demonstrate over the coming months. So yeah, in fact, I've seen your recent one on column. Oh my Lord, help me out there, Connor.
Escrow locking.
Well, we're not calling it escrow locking anymore. But
we changed it. Yeah. Oh, okay. Escrow locking originally, and I'm sure there'll be some in the old days. I always remember in a 10G beta ages ago, it was undrop. You drop a table, it was going to be undrop, and by the time it came to life, it was flashback table to before drop. Like, what the hell?
Yeah, I know. Welcome to the world of product naming, and we spend as much time reviewing product names as I think we do implementing them, which clearly doesn't make a significant amount of difference. But yeah, there's so much in 23C, and even features we haven't talked about at the CloudWorld will be coming through the various, and it will be announcing over the next 6 months or so.
For the benefit of listeners who are absolutely lost when Dom and I are talking about this locking thing coming in 23C, by way of an example, Dom walks into a phone store, buys a phone, I walk into a phone store, buy a phone. Both of us would create a row in a transaction table. Obviously, no locking issues there. Both of us might want to update our customer records, saying the number of phones or number of products we've bought has gone up by one. No locking issues there. But both of us in the same transaction might want to say the number of phones in the product table has gone up by one. And now we're both competing for that same summary row, saying the number of total phones bought has gone up by one. 23C has some scenarios where you can allow, in effect, conceptually, not implementation-wise, but in effect, two transactions or more than two transactions to have a lock on the same row at the same time. and we manage the concept of the fact that one might commit, one might roll back, etc. For me, I see that as a real game changer because people have written so much complex code around that to solve that problem.
I know, so much complex. I did as well. In my early days, it was like always that horrible situation where you would go through and implement it, and it would all work as an application developer. And you think, oh, that's fine, not a problem. And then the first performance test happens, and thinking, oh, this would be fine, and like instantly, like the database halts after 5 seconds and nothing happens, and like you then spend ages and ages looking for ways to improve just that one area of functionality inside the system. And so yeah, how many thousands and thousands and thousands of lines have written to support that model, and there's still been written to actually support it. As we speak now, I'm sure there is someone who's like, select for update. Oh no, it already has that sort
this isn't going to work.
Doom-like feeling that is this isn't going to work. So yeah, and these are the sort of things where the same thing happened with microservices. We were introducing support for technological sagas directly inside of the database. Currently, microservices are being written with thousands and thousands of lines of code to support the concept of manually rolling back transactions, because you have to occasionally roll back a transaction, right? If you've got distributed transactions across multiple databases. Oracle, again, we're looking to solve that problem directly in the database. And so it becomes very, very difficult.
In terms of complexity and microservices, it's a particular bugbear of mine to some degree, but maybe I'm just old school. Probably the best example is in terms of arguments perhaps against microservices, unless they're absolutely required. I think one merely needs to look at Twitter. Certain people high up in Twitter are saying, yes, we're going to turn off 80% of the microservices and see what happens. Jokes about Elon Musk aside, that does actually reveal that the more complexity you add, and microservices being a good example of that, it actually becomes harder to even know what your products are doing, and even harder to actually work out if they're not doing something what you want. And that's why I love the term app simple in terms of, we talk about a converged database. I know we're making offerings for microservices because we have to provide offerings for what the customers are demanding. But do you see a place where do you think microservices will eventually, and this is me being biased, fall into what I call an equilibrium or sweet spot where people finally realize that there's probably 1% of the solutions out there require microservices, and maybe 99% of applications out there pretty much are going to be fine on a monolith or something approaching a monolith. Monolith is said with this terrible derogatory term nowadays. Oh, it's a monolith. Oh. But the reality is, I would almost say that the vast majority of successful applications are built on monoliths and only ever need to go to microservices when they hit those limits.
Everything is like a pendulum. It swings one way and then swings back the other. So in answer to your question, I like the microservices architecture. I vaguely recall, and I'm sure it's just the way that your mind works, I vaguely recall like 20 years ago, I said to myself, do you know the problem we've got? Everyone is building everything that's too big. What we need is to build everything in small modular processes that we can actually test independently and have teams working. I'm fairly sure I invented the microservices architecture 25 years ago and just didn't tell anyone, because it seems like a sensible approach. And I'm not here to like knock it at all. And I still think, as you say, there is a place for it. There's certainly large-scale organizations who are supporting billions of users worldwide, and there is absolutely that use case. And it's highlighted lots and lots of engineering processes that work really, really well. Is it suitable for everyone? No, absolutely not. But I think the pendulum is slowly moving back the other direction from everything has to be microservices to this balanced approach. And I think that's where the sweet spot will be, where people, you hear this sort of like the level of granularity is what all that we need to agree on at this moment in time, which is what is the right size for a service component. And in many ways, it will get to the stage where you'll base them around a shared data model, where, whether you actually have orders and customers or banks and customers, where those clearly should probably be grouped together into a service. And there's lots of I'm a big fan of Medium. I spend probably too much of my day, not on TikTok, but on Medium, scrolling through lots and lots of articles about different software development approaches, different architecture models, different database technologies. And that's what I spend my time doing. And, there is definitely, I've picked up in the last few months, a discussion around, whether we've gone too far and the suitability of microservices. You hear from these small organizations that have tried to mimic, Netflix development process and are struggling, and not just struggling, failed. And that's painful if you're a small organization to realize that you've spent
a lot of money,
thousands and thousands of man's hours to try and implement an architecture that you're struggling to support. And here's the thing about it, though: tools will improve. We're introducing technologies that will make the building of microservices simpler to manage and model. But I think there has to be a realization, and I think it's coming, that one model doesn't suit everyone. And if you're a small organization, or even a medium or large to medium organization, you will, in many instances, you shouldn't regard a monolithic or a centralized development approach as the wrong one for all of your architectures. I think we all need to come up with a better software design paradigm, and I think we're getting there. And I'm positive about the direction software engineering inside of this area is moving. It's the right model for the right architecture, and it's not all going to be microservices, but it's not all going to be monolithic either. There'll be a sweet spot that we'll arrive at, which I think will be the basis of engineering moving forward.
I suppose my cynicism comes from, I was a huge fan of, there used to be one of the sort of the landmark books, I think came out decades ago, was The Pragmatic Programmer. Fantastic book. And I remember there was whole chapters on coupling and cohesion, which ultimately was saying you should write your code as if it was microservice based, but it had nothing to do with actually the tools and the frameworks you use. It's a good idea to write modular code. And I always think, well, it's almost like microservices is an expression of giving up. They've said, we told your developers to write modular code. You didn't. So now we're going to introduce a framework that says it enforces it.
Yeah. Again, I think modular code is, in some respects, it's like a lot of things. The ideas weren't supported by the tools. And so everyone rushes forward, realizes they don't have the tools and right engineering processes in place, and then has to step back a little bit. And then the tools catch up, and that approach can move forward. And I think we're in that phase at this moment in time where the tools and the architectures are slowly catching up with the development processes that are in place. But I think there is absolutely the case to be said that pushed forward too far, and I think it's now become almost a cult rather than a solution based on solid engineering principles. But there are much smarter people out there who are working on a daily basis, building code under incredible pressures, who have much better views on this than I do. And I'm focused very much on data-orientated issues, and I see the problems that come with microservice architectures from a data perspective, as opposed to necessarily the problems that microservices solve for the engineering of customer applications. So I'm open to each solution. I sound very much like United Nations in all of my responses there.
Microservices reminds me of Agile, and to try to explain what I mean by that is, I was a huge fan of Agile until it had the word trademark at the end of it. The term Agile, when you read the manifesto, was very much about you should apply some common sense when building your applications. And then all of a sudden it became Agile trademark, Agile methodology. I have a general rule, which is the moment something changes from ideas to methodology, it's irrevocably broken.
Yeah.
Because as you said, you then get the cultists who are like, no, you can't think forward. We have our little Agile doctrine here, or whatever doctrine we have, doctrine of the day, or doctrine du jour, which says, thou shalt not do X. And no matter what X is a good idea. It's like, no, we can't do it because it's not in the doctrine. So yeah.
Yeah. If you've got a vested interest in any solution, that's going to be something that you think is the only solution. And we're guilty of that as well, kind of inside of our organization. So
there's only one database that's the best.
That's right. But it's not always the case. But I'm still holding out for hope for microservices. But in its current form, I think it has lots of engineering challenges that people are discovering. And I think there'll be a step back a little bit, and it'll be much more focused around building quality applications, taking some of the benefits that microservices have and some of the benefits that monolithic approaches also have as well. And there'll be some happy ground that will arrive. And that's always, it's been the history of human development all along. We push forward too fast and then pull back. We end up with something that is usable and workable.
We've mentioned that microservices associated with complexity, and I also touched on this example of the concurrent locking that's coming in 23C, and I roughly explained what that would be for our listeners. To bring those two things together, when I first did a little video on this new locking facility coming in 23C, I did a demo where 2 sessions update the same row at the same time. And I put it out as a video saying, this is going to blow people's minds. And for some people, their minds were blown. A lot of other people came back saying, I see nothing impressive here. That's just how it works. The moment one update has finished, the next update is allowed to go. Or other people said, no, because no latches were taken as part of the update, we can have these concurrent locks. And a lot of things, and I'm not trying to belittle or make fun of people, but there's a lot of things that were just plain wrong. And the reason I want to bring that to complexity is in years gone by, you would call out developers on that saying, I can't believe you don't know these fundamentals about the database. But the modern developer has 37 frameworks, 512 stacks. When you say build a program, what you need to build is some HTML, some CSS, some React, some Node, some PL SQL, some et cetera, et cetera. Do you think the fact that a developer's life is so complex nowadays, that is there risk in the sense that the fundamentals, not just in database, but the fundamentals across whatever stacks they're using, is the malicious term, as we call it, the Stack Overflow-based developer, one that knows just enough from what they read on Stack Overflow. But do you think that is a genuine risk to successful applications, or is it just a real world?
No, I absolutely. When I started, I had Kendigan and Ritchie and the C handbook, and that's all I needed, right? And I look at my nephews and children and who are heading into the software industry today, and I unbelievable admiration to them. Just how you basically get through a day with the amount of information and skills that you need to know just to, a full stack developer to me is just how you keep up, how you literally turn up in the office in the day and feel comfortable that you know enough to actually achieve something is beyond me. I mean, I try and keep my hand in as best I can, writing utilities and just so I do enough. And I struggle. Perhaps I'm not spending enough time on it, but I consider myself to be fairly informed in terms of what's actually going on in the industry. And I still struggle. So yeah, it's difficult. It's so hard. And, it's a problem that we always face. And, I'm always grateful for the work that you and Chris and the others do around trying to keep people up to date on all of the problems they actually face. Because sometimes we just need to be reminded of the fundamentals. And it's, all this fancy technology that we actually have. There's a set of basic axioms that we all need to know that you easily forget. It's so easy to forget all of the power that has to go into making some of the things we just take for granted actually happen inside of databases. The fact that you can undo a transaction seems like a trivial thing. Well, of course I can undo it. Really? Because it's really, really complex when you've got like 1,000 other people also accessing your data. So yeah, how admiration, fear, and also concern that those basic axioms that all software developers should understand are slowly being forgotten because we spent so much time learning them, painfully learning them through the development of software. So yeah, I understand where you're coming from.
I find myself defending developers on forums, whether it's Stack Overflow or our Oracle forums, etc., or on Ask Tom, because someone will always ask or make a claim that's patently wrong, and people just leap onto them. No, that's stupid. No, RTFM, etc., etc. And I'm like, no, because the modern developer has so much going on their plate. And even if they've mastered what they've got, they walk into day and they go, oh, are you using framework X? No, we stopped using that yesterday. Now we're using framework Y. Yeah, it's just like, oh my God. So I wouldn't want to be a modern developer.
I mean, there was that classic cartoon of like a guy went on holiday for 2 weeks and came back and his whole JavaScript framework world had changed. Like, you know what? No, I think that's disappeared. Like, you're back to being a junior developer all over again. Yeah, and this is, it is somewhat ironically, the rate of change is so fast, so fast. And I look back on technologies, the big data world and how we were all convinced that, Hadoop was going to be the solution to all the world's problems. And like, MapReduce was the only way to solve all of the problems. And so everyone rushed in to that camp. And now we're all coming back and saying, actually, that wasn't a great place to be. In fact, SQL is, a much more comfortable place to be when it comes to solving these problems and the level of abstraction that you should be implementing. So, and that was only 5 years, 6 years ago, was it? I can't even remember. Maybe it was 10. But who knows? All of that stuff is largely forgotten and being replaced. And so you still have to maintain it because it's still part of core operational systems in many places. But it's somewhat ironically is considered probably in many instances more legacy than any technology that's been around for 40, 50 years. So yeah, it is horrific the rate that we're actually changing and not really learning from the lessons that we actually had. and learn painfully.
I am so thrilled you said that you made that example, because literally on my little list of notes here is an item, and I just put SQL as king. That was going to be what I was talking about. So this is awesome. So in terms of the content, SQL is the language. Like, you think of any other language, maybe C is probably the only other one that has stood the test of time. But unlike
and COBOL,
but unlike those two, which are seen as, well, there will always be that core people that write it, SQL seems to be growing and growing in popularity. In fact, the poster child for not using SQL, Mongo, their version 6 will have a SQL interface option. You got to be thinking, if Mongo are embracing SQL, why do you think SQL is the poster child? Like, why has it been so successful?
Maths, right? I mean, it's the only reason I can basically. Maths ultimately is the secret. It's based on solid principles that both mathematically correct. That it's easy, and more importantly, I think it makes sense. And I don't know whether it comes down to tables in some respects, right? I think people find it easier to visualize data as tables. And that comes from Excel spreadsheets. It comes from separated files. People just understand when you put information into a table. And so I think when you actually have a language that deals on that basis, and clearly there are other alternatives to SQL that deal on the relational model and SQL. But SQL, it grew slowly. It got refined slowly. It basically does as little or as much as you basically want. You can know a small amount and do an awful lot with SQL. And I think we tend to forget that. Like, you only need a little bit of knowledge with SQL to do, to build an empire. And clearly, the more you know, the more powerful you can actually do it, and the less things you actually need to do, and the less associated code you may need to actually use. But fundamentally, it comes down to the basis that it just makes sense to so many people when they start using it. And I know I've heard complaints from people, they hate using it, but it's like one of those things that once you actually start immersing yourself in it, it becomes impossible to visualize yourself using anything else. And I use machine learning quite a lot. I use Python pandas quite a lot, which is another classic example of tables. And when I use Python pandas, people aren't aware, it's like effectively a manipulation API for table-based information. It's used extensively in Spark and data analytics and a whole raft of other areas as well. But it comes down to the fact that even pandas at its heart, this Python-based API, is embracing a whole raft of SQL-like operations and functions and features. And when people, on Stack Overflow, ask questions about pandas, the first question is, I can do this in SQL. How do I do it in pandas? And then a lot of the responses are, you should stick doing it in SQL and only bring it to pandas when you really need to. You're right. Would I have said SQL would have had the same longevity as like C when I first started using it? No, because it seemed like unnatural to me. But I'm fairly sure in 100 years' time, if someone digs up this podcast, they will still be using SQL. I can't see it going anywhere.
I 100% agree. I always find it interesting that, and a topic, I'm running out of time, but a topic we could talk about is, I find it funny how people love SQL because it runs close to the data. You run it on the database server. And then you'll say to them, have you thought about using, say, Peel SQL or any form of stored procedure or any kind of logic that runs close to the data? And they're like, oh no, that's not where logic belongs. Logic belongs in the app tier. But that's a topic that we could dive into on another day.
Oh yeah, that's a big topic. Maybe we should bring old Bryn Llewellyn back to actually discuss that with us as well.
No, these podcasts can't run into the days. We stick to the hours. But I will let you go. So I'll lead into finishing off. Normally, whenever I have a guest on, I ask them if you have one of those, you have one piece of advice things. But given that you do have the most boring LinkedIn of all time, I will say, if you had to give someone who is just starting with the Oracle database one piece of advice, a modern developer, they're just out of college, maybe they've learned a bit of Oracle at university, or maybe they've learned a bit of Postgres or some other relational database, but they're jumping into a project which works with Oracle. What's the advice you would give them? What's the best way you think they could be successful, both as a developer, but also successful with the database they're using? What would you recommend the path they follow would be in that first 6 months?
Yeah, read a lot and learn from. We talked about Dave Enser and Tom Kite, and I think it's so easy there's so many distractions for young people today, and certainly young developers. It's so easy to get enamored by the next shiny thing. But the truth of the matter is, come back to this whole quiet giant type solution. Learn as much as you can, absorb as much as you can. Your podcasts and your YouTube channel, I think, is fantastic. And don't want to blow smoke up your backside, Connor, but I still watch your videos, because I believe my ego is small enough that I believe I can still learn something every day. And there is so much that I forget on a daily basis.
I love that term, learn something every day. That's a mantra of mine as well, but please continue. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, but the thing that we all tend to forget is how much we forget every day as well. And so the only way that you can actually learn anything, and the only advice I'll give them is, push yourself, try something new, build something that may only be of interest to you, but do it anyway. Instead of half an hour on TikTok, spend half an hour mucking around with the model clause or whatever you see appropriate, but learn something that no one else knows and then teach everybody else. That's the way that you actually progress and make an impact on the community. So yeah, I wish I did have some good advice to starters, but from my experience, I work with a couple at the moment who are working with me. I think I learn more from them than they learn from me. And so I think challenge yourself.
It's good that it's two-way, though. I have to wrap this up, Dom, but thank you very much for your time. Just for the listeners here, we could speak about so much. I had a whole list of things I was going to speak about. If you've ever heard of Dom's Swing Bench tool, probably the most successful Oracle database testing tool, stress testing tool that's ever been out there. Absolutely fantastic tool. We didn't even get close to that. Also, Dom's budding professional tennis career. We didn't even get close to that either. Lots of things to talk about. But thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, I'll be retiring from Oracle soon and going on the Pro Tour. I'm fairly sure that's going to happen.
I hope so. Well, I have to admit, next time we're in the same continent, I'll have to pack a racket and we'll have a bit of a swing. So
it will only go badly for me, Connor.
Thank you very much for your time, Dom.
My
and
pleasure.
Thank you for your elements of wisdom and your 30 years plus of experience at Oracle. And hopefully we'll see you at Oracle for another 30 plus years, you and I.
Let's hope not.
And somewhere, somehow, there is a Brussels sprout with our name on it. Thank you very much for your time, Dom.
Forward to it. Take care. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. The music credit goes to Zanman from Pixabay Music.